The rain had started before sunset, turning the streets of central London into a blur of reflections. Headlights smeared across wet asphalt, neon from bars in Soho trembling in shallow puddles. From the glass facade on the 15th floor, she could see the city moving in tight patterns, people hurrying under umbrellas, buses exhaling at every stop, the Thames a dark ribbon in the distance. Inside the office, however, everything was controlled, silent, warm, and arranged to his taste, from the minimalist furniture to the framed black-and-white photographs of the city's old docks. It was the kind of place where nothing seemed out of place, except for the tension that sometimes hung in the air when he entered. Her name was Emily Ward, 26, efficient, and determined not to waste this opportunity. She had grown up far from this glossy skyline, in a small town where the loudest sound at night was the occasional train. London, with its constant hum and the promise of careers built on long hours and endless ambition, had always been a distant goal. Now, working as a personal assistant in a company that officially dealt with logistics and private security, she had the feeling that a lot happened off the paper. Still, the salary was generous, the benefits solid, and she had convinced herself that every business had its shadows. His name appeared only as Mr. Romano in official emails and documents. No first name, no unnecessary information. He was the man people lowered their voices for in the corridor, the one whose arrival made even the most confident executives straighten their posture. At first, Emily had tried to ignore the rumors that he had connections to crime families, that he controlled clubs and warehouses in some of the most profitable parts of the city, that his real power never showed up in contracts. She preferred facts, schedules, meetings, contracts to organize, calls to filter. Yet the way people reacted to him said more than any document ever could. That evening, the office was quieter than usual. Most employees had gone home, leaving only the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping of a distant elevator. Emily was at her desk, organizing the agenda for the next week, confirming a dinner in Mayfair and a private meeting near Soho, where he sometimes held discussions with partners after midnight. She checked times twice, conscious that any mistake could have consequences far beyond a simple correction. The glass door behind her opened with a soft click. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. There was a particular silence that came with his presence, the kind that pushed all other sounds to the background. Emily straightened a stack of papers, then stood up, turning with a composed expression. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" he asked, shrugging off a dark coat that still carried drops of rain. "Yes," she replied. "The lunch meeting is confirmed for 1 o'clock, and the evening appointment in Mayfair has been moved to 9. Your driver will be here 30 minutes early." He studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if measuring more than her efficiency. Romano was in his early 40s, with an appearance that didn't fit the stereotype of chaos people usually associated with criminal power. His suit was perfectly cut, his tie simple, his hair neatly styled. There was nothing noisy about him. His authority was quiet, the kind that settled in a room and never needed to be announced. That quietness, however, made people nervous. "You adapt quickly," he said, taking a step closer to her desk. "Most assistants need weeks to understand my schedule." "It's part of the job," she replied, "and the patterns are clear once you look closely." A hint of a smile touched his lips, more like a brief acknowledgement than genuine amusement. Emily felt that familiar mix of caution and curiosity. Working this close to him meant observing details, how he spoke, how he paused before answering, how his phone calls sometimes shifted tone mid-sentence. It also meant learning how to keep a professional distance. He dropped a leather folder on the desk, then leaned against the edge, crossing his arms. The city lights behind them painted a faint glow around his silhouette. "Tell me something," he said, his voice lower now, less formal. "Do you have a partner?" The question landed between them with unexpected weight. It was simple on the surface, the kind of thing colleagues might ask each other casually at the office. But nothing about him was casual. Emily hesitated for a brief second, feeling her heartbeat accelerate in a way that annoyed her. She reminded herself that this was still just a question, that she didn't owe him more than a polite answer. "Not yet," she whispered, the words leaving her mouth softer than intended. For a moment the room felt even quieter. Romano's gaze sharpened, his posture altering almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a dramatic reaction. No raised voice, no obvious expression of surprise. It was subtler than that, a flicker of something possessive in his eyes, a tightening of his jaw, as if her personal life had suddenly become a variable he needed to calculate. Years of dealing with difficult clients had trained Emily to read micro-reactions, and she didn't miss this one. "Not yet," he repeated, as if testing the phrase. "So you're available?" It wasn't a question, not exactly. Emily felt a slight discomfort, the kind that comes when professional lines blur without warning. She straightened her shoulders and forced a neutral tone. "My personal life doesn't interfere with my work," she replied. "You can rely on that." "I already do," he said. The answer came quickly, but the look he gave her lingered longer than expected. His attention was no longer on the folder, the schedule, or the meetings. For a moment, she felt like the only item on his mental list. He picked up the folder again and opened it, flipping through a few pages, but his mind seemed elsewhere. The subtle jealousy that had flickered across his face did not disappear. Instead, it settled into a quiet tension. The idea that someone else might occupy her time, her attention, clearly did not please him. He didn't say it outright, yet it was there, in the way his jaw remained tight, in the way his next words carried an edge. "In the future," he said, not looking up from the papers, "if someone appears, a partner, I mean, it would be better if I knew. I need to be aware of anything that might affect your availability." The justification was professional, at least on the surface. Emily felt the logic in his words, but also the extra layer beneath them. There was control there, a need to monitor, to anticipate, that went beyond simple planning. She chose her next words with care. "If a serious commitment affects my schedule, I'll let the company know in advance," she replied, "just like anyone else would." He finally looked up. "You are not like anyone else here." The statement was ambiguous. It could have been a compliment to her competence, or a warning that her position was different, more exposed. Emily held his gaze, refusing to look away. If there was a test hidden in this conversation, she would not fail by shrinking back. "I understand the responsibilities of my role," she said, "and I intend to keep them separate from my private decisions." A silence stretched between them, heavier now but still controlled. Outside, the city continued in its restless rhythm, car lights crossing the streets, music probably starting to rise in the clubs that made London nights famous. Inside this office, however, a different kind of nightlife existed, made of negotiations, unspoken rules, and personal boundaries, constantly at risk of shifting. Finally, Romano closed the folder with a soft, definitive sound. "Good," he said. "Keep it that way." He pushed himself away from the desk and put his coat back on. For an instant, Emily thought the conversation was over, that he would return to his usual distance, but as he reached the door, he paused and looked back. "And Emily," he added, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent she couldn't fully define, "if someone comes into your life, make sure he understands who you work for." It wasn't a threat. Not directly. Yet the implication hung in the air like a shadow. Anyone close to her would, inevitably, become entangled with his world, with his expectations, with his quiet, possessive watchfulness. Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "Yes, Mr. Romano," she answered. When he left, the door closing softly behind him, the room regained its previous silence. Still, nothing felt quite the same. The question, the way he had repeated her answer, the hidden jealousy in his expression, everything suggested that their professional relationship had just crossed an invisible line. Emily sat back down, eyes drifting toward the window, watching the city glow beneath the rain. She had wanted London to be a place of opportunity, of independence and new beginnings. Instead, on that rainy evening, she realized that working for a man like Romano meant that even the most intimate parts of her life might not remain entirely hers. And the words, "not yet," suddenly felt less like an open future and more like the start of a complicated promise. Emily arrived earlier than usual the next morning, the sky over London still a pale grey, buses gliding through almost empty streets as the city slowly woke up. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavements slick and the air sharp, with the familiar mix of exhaust, coffee and cold metal that defined early hours in the financial districts. Inside the building, the lobby lights seemed too bright for that time of day, reflecting off polished floors and glass panels. She greeted the security staff with a brief nod and made her way to the elevator, her mind replaying fragments of the previous night. On the ride up, she stared at her own reflection in the mirrored walls. The conversation with Romano kept returning in flashes. The question, her answer, the way his expression had shifted when she said, "not yet." The words had sounded harmless then, almost shy, but now they felt heavier, as if they had opened a door she hadn't meant to touch. She inhaled slowly and reminded herself of the key rule she had set for this job. Stay professional, stay calm, stay focused. Whatever he felt, whatever lay behind his questions, did not have to define her. When she entered the 15th floor, the office was empty, the open-plan area still dark. Only the corridor leading to Romano's office was lit, a line of soft light spilling out from under the door. Emily frowned. It was unusual for him to be here this early. She left her coat on the back of her chair, turned on her computer, and checked the agenda. 2 morning meetings, 1 call with a contact abroad, lunch free, for now. Nothing suggested an emergency. Before she could decide whether to bring him the updated documents, the intercom on her desk buzzed. "Emily!" His voice came through, calm and direct. "When you're ready, come in." She straightened instinctively. "Of course," she replied, pressing the button. "I'll be there in a minute." She took a moment to align the folders on her desk, less because they needed organizing and more because her hands needed something to do. Then she picked up the morning briefing and walked to his office, knocking lightly before entering. Romano was standing by the window, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up, a mug of coffee in his hand. The city stretched out behind him in muted colors, cranes and rooftops cutting into the sky. He turned when she closed the door, his eyes already fixed on her, as if he had been waiting not just for the briefing but for her presence. "Good morning," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Morning," he replied. "You're early." "So are you," she countered. A faint curve touched his mouth, not quite a smile. She placed the briefing on his desk, pointing out the key items without sitting down. "These are today's appointments," she said. "I highlighted the topics that might require more preparation. The meeting at 11 could be sensitive. There were changes in the contract draft overnight." He glanced at the pages, then set them aside, his attention returning to her more than to the ink and paper. "Sit down, Emily," he said, nodding toward the chair opposite his desk. "There's something I want to clarify before the day begins." The phrasing made her wary. She sat anyway, adjusting her posture so she didn't appear defensive, hands resting calmly on her lap. "About last night?" she asked. Romano studied her for a long second. "You remember it clearly?" "It was a memorable conversation," she answered, hard to ignore. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, a habit she had noticed when he was thinking through several angles at once. "I need people around me who are predictable," he said slowly. "Not in the sense of being boring, but in the sense that I know where their loyalties lie. This isn't a normal office, Emily. What happens here affects more than calendars and invoices." She had expected something like that, but hearing it laid out so calmly sent a small chill down her spine. "My loyalty is professional," she replied. "You pay me to make your work easier, to protect your time and information. I'm fully committed to that." "That's not what worries me," he said. "I don't doubt your commitment. I'm thinking about distractions, external influences, people who think they can step into your life without understanding what comes with it." There it was again. Not just concern, but ownership. He spoke as if her personal relationships were variables in his risk assessment, elements in a system he controlled. Part of her admired the consistency. Another part felt the familiar resistance rising inside. "With respect," she said carefully, "my personal life is not an operational risk unless I allow it to be, and I'm not careless." Romano's gaze hardened, not in anger, but in intensity. "Everyone is careful," he said quietly, "right up until the moment they are not." Silence settled between them. She refused to look away. After a moment, his expression shifted, the edge softening just enough. "There's an event tonight," he said, changing the subject without really changing it. "A private gathering in one of the clubs we work with. I want you there." The request caught her off guard. "You want me at a club event?" "It's not open to the public," he explained. "Partners, intermediaries, a few people I prefer to keep close when deals are discussed. I need you to manage documents, keep track of who arrives and who leaves, handle calls I can't take in front of everyone." That part made sense. She was his assistant. Managing logistics in a club environment was just another version of her job, yet there was something else. A quieter, more personal reason that crept into his tone. "And," he added, eyes on her, "it's time you see more of the world you're working in. You've been behind this desk long enough. You should understand the context." Emily hesitated. She thought of the loud music, the dim lights, the people who didn't appear in any public record but seemed to move pieces behind the scenes. She had sensed that side of his work for weeks. Now he was inviting her directly into it. "Is it a request or an order?" she asked. Romano tilted his head, as if considering whether the distinction mattered. "Call it necessary," he said. "You'll be picked up at 8, dressed discreetly, but not like you're coming to the office. You represent me, but you don't need to disappear into the background." She took a breath. "All right. I'll be ready." He nodded, satisfied. For a moment, the conversation could have ended there, but his eyes lingered, and she knew he hadn't completely left the topic of the previous night behind. "One more thing," he said. "If someone asks tonight about who you are or what you do, keep your answers simple. You're my assistant. Nothing more, nothing less." Emily held his gaze. "Is that how you see it?" For the first time that morning, he seemed genuinely caught off balance. The question hung between them, precise and unavoidable. "In this business," he replied after a pause, "clear definitions keep people safe." "That wasn't my question," she said softly. He looked at her, the line of his mouth tightening, and for a heartbeat, the calm facade slipped. There was something unmistakably personal in his eyes now, a mixture of interest, possessiveness, and an unspoken refusal to admit either. "Right now," he said finally, "you are essential. That's all you need to know. Essential, not just competent, not just useful." The words settled in her chest with unfamiliar weight. It was flattering in one sense, alarming in another. Essential things were rarely allowed to walk away freely. "Then I'll act accordingly," she said. He nodded, as if a contract had just been silently signed. "You can go," he added. "We have a long day before tonight." Back at her desk, Emily threw herself into the routine, answering emails, coordinating the car schedule, confirming attendance for the evening event. The normal tasks helped steady her thoughts, but the undercurrent remained. Every time she finished a call or updated a document, her mind drifted back to the way he had said essential and the way he had demanded to be informed if someone entered her life. Shortly after noon, one of the senior managers passed by her desk, pausing with a half-curious, half-cautious look. "Big night ahead?" he asked. "Just work," she replied. "Apparently I'm needed at an event." He gave a small, knowing nod. "If he's bringing you, it means he trusts you," the man said. "Not many people get that close." Emily forced a smile. Trust. That was one way to name it. Control was another. The reminder did nothing to calm her. The rest of the afternoon passed in a mix of calls, signatures, and subtle tension. When her shift ended officially, she didn't go home. Instead, she used the small private bathroom near the conference room to change into a simple black dress and a fitted blazer, professional enough for business, discreet enough for a club environment. She tied her hair back, leaving just enough softness not to look severe. At 8 sharp, her phone lit up with a message from the driver. "I'm downstairs." As she walked through the lobby, she felt the security guard's curious gaze follow her. The city outside had changed again. The evening traffic had thickened, lights from restaurants and bars glowing warm against the dark. London at night was a different kind of alive. And tonight, she would see a part of it that most people never did. The car door opened, and she slid into the back seat. A moment later, Romano joined her from the other side. He looked different outside the office. Same sharp suit, but with a looseness in his posture that suggested he was entering a territory where he never felt out of place. His eyes scanned her quickly, assessing. "Good choice," he said. "You look appropriate." "Appropriate," she repeated. "High praise." He almost smiled. "You know what I mean. You'll draw attention without inviting questions." As the car pulled into the flow of traffic, the city's lights slipping across the windows, Emily realized that the line between her work and her private life had already started to blur, whether she liked it or not. Tonight, in his world, among his people, she would not just be a name in his calendar. She would be seen, observed, measured, and somewhere beneath all the logistics and strategy, jealousy waited. A quiet presence beside her, sitting in the same car, watching every move. The drive into central London took less than half an hour, but to Emily it felt longer, every minute stretching under the weight of what the night might reveal. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Clusters of people on the sidewalks, the glow of pub windows, lines forming outside popular clubs, taxis stopping and starting with impatient rhythm. The car slipped through the traffic with practiced ease, turning into narrower streets where the buildings leaned closer and the lights grew more selective. Romano spoke only when necessary, giving brief instructions to the driver or checking his phone for updates. When he did glance at Emily, it was with the same measuring look he used in negotiations, calm, unreadable, but never indifferent. She kept her eyes on the window, absorbing details. The graffiti on an alley wall, the discreet side entrances of venues that never appeared on tourist guides, the way certain doors had no signs but still had people watching them. The club they approached did not display its name in large letters. From the street it looked like a converted warehouse, its entrance marked only by a subtle black awning and a short line of expensive cars parked nearby. 2 doormen in dark coats stood at the door, earpieces in place, their attention sharp. Music vibrated faintly through the walls, more bass than melody, like a heartbeat under layers of concrete. The driver stopped near the entrance and got out first. Romano stepped out. then turned to offer Emily a brief nod, a gesture that meant follow more than any polite invitation. As soon as they appeared, the doormen straightened. One of them opened the door without asking any questions. No list was checked. Romano's presence was its own form of identification. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying a mix of perfume, alcohol, and the faint trace of smoke from a terrace somewhere at the back. Lighting was low, strategically placed to highlight certain areas and keep others in shadow. A long bar dominated one side of the room, staffed by bartenders who moved efficiently, barely looking at the faces in front of them. On the other side, private booths and tables were arranged with deliberate distance, some open to view, others partially concealed. "Stay close," Romano murmured, his voice almost lost under the music. "But not behind me. You're working, not hiding." Emily nodded. Her role was clear, at least on paper. Keep track of the people he met, note names, times, any decisions that might require follow-up, and be ready to handle calls or messages he couldn't take himself. She had a slim folder in her bag, along with a phone dedicated to work, separate from her personal one. A man in his 50s approached them as they moved deeper into the club, his suit a little too loud, his smile a little too wide. "Romano," he called, greeting him with a firm handshake. "You made it. I said I would," Romano replied calmly. "This is Emily, my assistant." The man's gaze flicked over her in an assessing sweep, more curious than respectful. Emily met his eyes briefly, offering a small, professional smile, then lowered her attention to the tablet she had been given before they left the office. It helped create a barrier, a reminder that she was there to work. "Busy night," the man said. "People are impatient. Everyone wants reassurance." "They'll have it," Romano answered, "as long as they deserve it." They were guided to a semi-private area overlooking the main floor. From there, Emily could see almost everything: the bar, the dance floor where music pulsed and people moved in shifting patterns, the corridor that led to the back rooms. Waiters brought drinks without being called, leaving them on the table and vanishing again. Romano sat at the center of the curved booth, positioning himself so he had a clear view of the room. Emily took the seat to his right, slightly angled, close enough to hear his conversations, but not so close as to appear informal. Her eyes adjusted gradually to the lighting, picking up on details: who nodded in his direction, who avoided his gaze, who pretended not to look and failed.